please put your hands together. A warm welcome for Dr. Peter Ballerstedt.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. Oh, come on. You didn't carb up for lunch. You're not asleep yet, are you? Excellent. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting this. This is an amazing gathering. So I have a couple key goals, objectives today. I want to begin the exorcism of any sense of guilt that people might have about eating animal source foods, and particularly those that we're fortunate enough to get from ruminant animals. I want people to value their own health more than some of the narratives that we're being fed. That when you improve your health, you are improving the world. And that we need to weigh that in any of the discussions or conversations that we end up having. And I sum this up as that the winning formula is ruminant agriculture plus metabolic health equals sustainable societies. And unless we look at the entire story from grazing to grave, you should pardon the expression, or pasture to plot, as in funeral, we're not having a serious conversation about sustainability. So disclosures, just to let you know who's talking to you, I really don't have any. I'm an advocate for low-carb, healthy fat, keto, carnivore diets, and for ruminant animal agriculture. I've worked in forage agriculture for most of my adult life. I currently work for a forage seed company, but I am not here in any capacity as a representative of that company, okay? My background is as a forage agronomist and a ruminant nutritionist. How many people here know what an agronomist is? Excellent, excellent. So my training is in those sciences related to healthy soils, healthy plants, and healthy animals, particularly ruminant animals. Okay, but like many, I had my own personal health experience that started in 2007 when I began a dietary journey, because in 2007, I was a 51-year-old balding, obese, pre-diabetic. And by following books like Dr. Michael and Mary Dan Eads' Protein Power Life Plan, today I'm just balding. So from that point on, I became very interested in this topic that we're learning so much about. And then starting in 2010, I started showing up, stalking some of the speakers that we get to hear at functions like this. And my contribution, I hope, is just to give some information. What I really want is to make sure people understand that we can put the credibility of this great lifestyle medication message at risk by repeating some things about subjects we don't know a lot about, but we hear it in the community. And so hopefully I can contribute some information that maybe can balance some of that out. So again, I dream of the day when the public understands that their consumption of the products in the background lessens their need for products in the foreground. And if you can't read what it says, the one in the back says fresh meat, and the one in the foreground says diabetes care. If you are restoring your mental and physical health with a diet containing some amount of animal source foods, please, please, please don't listen to the people that sold you the diet that made you sick in the first place. And if you don't understand the nexus between environmentalism and modern, quote-unquote, nutrition and the nutritional guidelines, I'll be happy to explain that to you. But they've been intertwined since their inception and actually before that. So a quick review might be in order. Red meat does not make you fat, clog your arteries, give you diabetes, cause cancer, kill your kidneys, acidify your blood, or melt your bones. Nor does it make you morally weak. Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. And I said this recently. I looked at one person in the front row and I said, you might be morally weak, but it won't be because you eat meat. He came up later to say he graduated from Loma Linda. Nor does it deprive you of food, drive climate change, or destroy the planet. Okay, so let's get serious about this. Let's have a real conversation. I'm going to suggest that the preponderance of evidence from all scientific disciplines strongly suggests that the most likely harm associated with meat consumption is from not consuming enough. And if you can't get it from animal source foods, you don't need it. Oh, excellent. And understand this conflation, right? You see things like this. What's good for you is good for our planet, right? This, yes, no. I mean, is it safe for me to say that in this audience that I agree with Dean Ornish on this point? I do suspect we're going to differ on the details, and that's the critical thing. It's the details. We can say things that sound good, but you better drill down into it because there's lots of games going on. They seem like they have a really compelling argument until you start unbraiding the rope and testing each strand, because it's a really thick rope they're going to come at you with about your health and the planet and ecology and all these things. But you start taking those and testing each strand, and you find that each strand factually fails. And perhaps it's my mission to help people find the information that will help them do that testing. Here's an aspirational goal for each and every one of us. We should all strive against the generation and propagation of unnecessary human suffering. Does anyone in here disagree with that? Death is inevitable in this life, but a life of protracted ill health is not. That's our great good message, I think. Chronic disease prevention and control helps people to live longer and healthier lives. Isn't that the message here? This is the unsustainable crisis. Over half of adult Americans today have either diabetes or prediabetes, and that's assessed with bad metrics. Farmers would go bankrupt using the metrics that our public health system is based on. 60% of adult Americans have one or more chronic diseases. 88% of adult Americans, as we heard earlier this morning, do not enjoy optimal metabolic health. The cost of this? Equivalent to 9.3% of GDP. Let's talk about sustainability, shall we? Because you must know that when we talk about sustainability, this is not included. If they get to human health, it's entirely informed by the conventional narrative. Now, when you've got 88% of the adult population not enjoying optimal metabolic health, this is an opportunity for us. Because the dietary guidelines themselves on page 6 say that they're not intended for the treatment of disease. Golden! The argument's over. What they say is, eat this way, you won't get sick, but if you get sick, don't eat this way. Okay, I got it. So y'all can continue serving the 12% you haven't made sick yet, and we can encourage the 88% to find an effective lifestyle intervention that will lead to restoration of metabolic health. Great good news. Human nutritionists don't even work in the right form of energy. We are decades ahead of you in the animal nutrition realm. When you see calorie content, you're talking gross calories. When we work in animal nutrition, we drill down to at least metabolizable energy levels. Which of these two groups of mammals is designed to digest a low-fat diet? You've got group A, sheep, cattle, mountain gorilla. 2 out of those 3 are ruminants. Then you've got a modern human being, a lion, and a polar bear. How many think the top group is designed to digest a low-fat diet? Show of hands. How many people think group B? How many people have seen this before and know it's a trick question? Because there's a difference between digest and ingest. I told you we need to drill into this to make sure we know what they're saying. Because sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So the ruminant obviously ingests a low-fat diet. Less than 5% crude fat in a cow's ration. But the microbes in a rumen convert that carbohydrate into volatile fatty acids so that by the time everything's done, about 80% of our energy ends up coming from volatile fatty acids that are produced by the microbes. She ingests low fat, she digests high fat. Now, human beings don't have rumens. Newsflash. Some of us may look like we do. So our digestive system is somehow formed by the diet that influenced our development as a species. It must be in the food we eat. So there are such things as essential nutrients, macronutrients. We've heard about them. For a monogastric like us, that's protein, that's fat, that's carbohydrate. There's no such thing as an essential protein in a ruminant's diet. There's no such thing as an essential fatty acid in a ruminant's diet, and there are 2 forms of carbohydrates that are absolutely essential in a ruminant's diet. Almost like there's a ecological meshing there, isn't it? We didn't evolve to eat meat, we evolved because we ate meat. Animal source foods are superior sources of nutrition for humans. It should not be a surprise to this community that if I have equal amounts of energy from plant sources and animal sources, they're not going to have the same metabolic effect, even though they're isocaloric, right? Okay. Similarly with protein and with minerals, even if I give you isometric amounts from plant sources and animal sources, they're not going to have the same metabolic effect. The animal sources are far more bioavailable. Yes? In some cases, sole source of essential nutrients. You can't supplement for them. Vitamin requirement is entirely dependent on whether you're eating primarily a plant-based source diet or an animal source diet. So it's not like it's a fixed amount. So it would appear that plant source foods are not required. In terms of protein supply, anyone that's advocating for a plant-based diet, again, humanity's diet's already plant-based, and that's not a good thing. On a global basis, more protein comes from cereals for humanity's diet than comes from animal source foods. And that's not good. Because as was mentioned a little earlier, what else do we get with plant protein? Carbohydrates, anti-nutrients, various toxins. Just like energy isn't properly discussed in human nutrition, for the most part, protein isn't either. Which makes any conversation about sustainability and food production seem really kind of stupid. I guess that was the technical term. A little too judgmental? Don't know. Protein intake guidelines should not be on a percent of calorie basis. Please stop talking about it that way. You're not eating protein for calories. You're eating protein for amino acids. And you need a specific amount of protein, and you need specific amounts of essential amino acids. That's a quantity. If you're estimating things based on percent of calories, what happens when the calories vary? Your intake varies. Intake targets, specific amount. We now know that elderly should be eating more protein because we get less efficient at utilizing it. We now understand, sorry, permit me, an old ag joke that I heard from an emeritus professor. The problem with one-size-fits-all recommendations, they're averages. And on average, your average human being has one testicle and one breast, but you don't see many of them walking around. So we need to find what the individual needs are, and that's going to vary with all kinds of factors. Crude protein is exactly that. It's a crude protein value estimated from total nitrogen content. That's it. So on a food label, in food tables, that's the figure you're most likely going to be seeing. And in no way is the protein in quote content from plant sources equivalent to what you're getting from animal sources. So beware of anyone who starts talking to you about how much protein you can get from broccoli, please. Biological value of proteins is at least half again as high, in some cases far higher. The environmental footprint associated with the production of animal versus vegetal, I like that term, protein-containing food products, needs to be reevaluated on the basis of the content of essential amino acids in foods. We're not having the right conversation. And when we have the right conversation, we find that the environmental footprint for animal source foods is equivalent. It's in the same ballpark. Then this last quote. These considerations might be useful in the political planning of the food production system, aiming at providing sufficient food for humans in the near future. Anyone else scared of the phrase political planning of the food production system? They did such a good job with the dietary guidelines. Livestock are a key global commodity and asset. And anyone who talks about eliminating livestock agriculture better come up with something that addresses these factors. For example, half of the fertilizer used to produce the crops that they say we should eat more of is animal manure. Where's that going to come from? Oh, you're going to use more fossil fuel. Got it. See, these are not simple either-or things. Livestock worldwide consume about 6 billion metric tons of dry matter. Sounds like a lot, but all livestock, swine, poultry, fish, ruminants, non-ruminant herbivores, 86% of what goes to feed them is not human edible. So anyone who talks to you about how much more food we could have if we didn't, okay, get it? And this is because of we need to now make sure that we understand the difference between a monogastric and a ruminant animal. So a monogastric like us, our diet consists again of the three macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats. They move into an acidic environment in the stomach with enzymes, degrades those, breaks them down, denatures them. Then that ingesta flows into the small intestine where it's then subject to further digestion and absorption, right? Okay? From the small intestine, a monogastric is going to absorb sugars, amino acids, fatty acids. Ruminants are a little different. Ruminants are like cows, sheep, goats, deer. There's 100 and some odd species around the world, both domestic and wild. Their diet is carbohydrate and protein. I mentioned earlier that it's very little fat. That ingest of that plant material goes into this fermentation vat where the microorganisms that live there break that material down. They break it down, they utilize it themselves. In the course of their metabolizing that material, they give off byproducts, some of which, like volatile fatty acids, they don't use, but the host animal does. And then in other cases, they build more of themselves, so they create microbial protein. That microbial protein is then harvested by the host animal when those microbes flow down into their acidic stomach. And so you've got this multi-chambered system where this animal can ingest large amounts of plant matter of relatively low nutrient quality. and then process it until it breaks down sufficiently to make room for more. So even cows can't be vegans. Come on, I thought that was a good one. Call them microbivores or microbians, because what they're doing is primarily producing and subsisting on the rumen microorganisms, okay? Because at the end of the day, the most abundant carbohydrate in the biosphere, something called cellulose, is unusable by humans directly. We don't digest fiber. When did fiber become an essential nutrient in the human diet? Can somebody tell me that? One of the slides that I've gone by has it as the second leading cause of death due to poor diet. A lack of fiber. WTF. But I digest. So ruminant animals have these essential ecological functions. We could go through them. Again, they convert structural and non-structural carbohydrates into fat. So let's let the ruminants turn the carbohydrates into fat for us instead of us. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. They convert plant protein, which really isn't protein, and non-protein nitrogen into high-quality animal protein. They upcycle. They reduce the unstable polyunsaturated fatty acids into more stable monounsaturated and saturated fatty acids. They produce vitamin B12, other vitamins. They increase bioavailability of essential minerals. They degrade anti-quality components. They maintain health of grassland systems. They recycle nutrients and build soil health. They provide services like draft and, as I mentioned, manure for fertilizer, byproducts. We harvest a cow. It's not just meat. There's leather. There's all kinds of goods that are generated from that. We generate new wealth. So Impossible Burger has no way to address this. It is, in fact, impossible. If we drill down and just look at ruminant animals, they're ingesting about 5 billion metric tons of dry matter a year. Okay? But at least 92 and maybe as much as 95%, depends on how you want to account for it, of what they eat is not utilizable by humans on a global basis. So if somebody says otherwise, okay, remember the phrase male bovine fecal matter. Okay, good. That 4% of grain going in to feed the global ruminant herd represents 10%, 10% of the global grain cereal crop, cereal production, 10. That's what we're talking about, okay. And let's make sure that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about a corn-fed steer. The one that's closest to me on this screen, and also on that one. Is that right? Nope. The one that's labeled finishing ration is the one highest in corn. Looks to me like they're eating a lot more than just corn. Yes? And that's the finishing ration. That's at the end of the feeding process that lasts about 3 months, 4 months out of the lifetime of a steer, which might be a little less than 2 years. Okay? The rest of the time they're on grass. So let's make sure that we know what we're talking about. So the first thing that ruminants do for us, arguably, now if you like to eat plants, I'm all for you. Knock yourself out. If you can eat them and they don't cause any problem for you, that's fine. I just like us to understand that there's nothing essential from them. I'm going to try this. A man I've come to respect does this, so we'll see if it works. Consider this the Earth's surface, this standard sheet of paper. Okay? The entire Earth's surface. So now I'm just going to take it, and I'm going to try to fold it into quarters. Don't have to be exact, you're too far away to see. So here we now have the land area of the Earth's surface. Yes? Wow, tough audience. My business card represents, in proportion, the agricultural land area of the Earth's surface. Okay? Now, I'm going to tear my card 1/3, 2/3. This is what we've got that's considered arable cropland for the production of those grains and fruits and nuts and vegetables. This is called marginal, that's called pasture, that's called rangeland. Okay? So anybody who talks about how much of agricultural land is going to livestock, and if we got rid of livestock, think of how, nope, remember this. Okay? That work? Thank you, Frank. So we only have so much land, we can only do certain things to grow food on it. We can grow grain, oil, seed, fruit, and vegetable crops, primarily for human production. We've established that. We can grow pasture crops to be grazed. We can then grow forage crops, which get hayed and, conserved in some cases. Obviously, the ones in green are not utilizable by humans, but they're feed for humans, but they're feed for ruminant animals. From the grain and crops, we're going to produce those commodities for human use. But when we do that, we produce a lot of waste product. We produce stuff that we don't eat. Well, we can feed that to ruminants too. Then we can also feed non-protein nitrogen to ruminants and get protein produced. And by the way, what's the source of essential nutrition for human beings? And then, of course, we produce waste products. The ruminants are very good at cycling those back onto the productive land that they're coming from. We've pretty well broken it for humanity. Life on Earth is based on this cycling of CO2. Photosynthesis, we reduce carbon dioxide with water. We then produce carbohydrates. We are not phototrophic organisms, we are heterotrophic organisms. By our nature, we must eat other organisms. It's a simple fact of life. But then we release the carbon dioxide as we oxidize that reduced carbon to achieve the energy that was captured from photosynthesis. In perennial plant situations like pasture, we have far more of that material being sequestered into the soil in roots. Good grazing management, you would cut off about half of what's above ground in any one grazing. Cutting would be a little different, but you'd still leave 4 inches. So there's a significant amount left. Understand that any methane that's going to come out of a cow has got to come from the feed that she ate. And any feed that she ate is made from CO2 from the atmosphere. So the dry matter goes into the cow, the methane comes out, it gets oxidized back to CO2 in the atmosphere within about 10 years. So it's a cycling of CO2 in the cow as opposed to an enrichment of the atmosphere, which is what we get when we burn fossil fuel to produce all those fruits and vegetables and nuts and, okay? This is just a really cool example. If I cut a grass plant every 2 days, you can see how deep the roots go, not very deep. If I let it go 21 days, they grow essentially to the length that they would grow if you never cut the grass plant. And every time you graze off the top, a certain amount of that root matter is let go. The plant doesn't need it anymore. So this is how grazing management can increase organic matter. We've been distracted by focusing on the wrong cycle. We should be looking more at the water cycle than the carbon cycle. There's a lot of reasons we could go into. This is just a very cool demonstration of water-stable structure that comes in a soil that's been under long-term perennial grass instead of corn. Okay, same soil type. Unfortunately, the whole conversation, such as it is, gets oversimplified, and all anybody thinks about when they talk about sustainability is one issue. I've already started telling you some facts about the nature of methane from ruminant animals, but here's some data. All of agriculture in the United States accounts for 9.0% of anthropogenic global greenhouse gas emissions. Animal agriculture accounts for about 4%. Somebody help me with the math. What's that leave? Thank you. 5%. So plant agriculture already produces more anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in the United States than livestock. And beef is 2%. What would happen if we just got rid of livestock agriculture? By the way, today in the United States, we've got 9 million. We've got 9 million dairy cows. We've got 9.5 million horses. Notice how they never mention the horses when they have this conversation? Might be because that might hurt their funding stream. But I digest again. So if we were to eliminate all animal agriculture and pets, and by the way, those animals don't get to hang around. Oh, no. No, after the world's largest barbecue, what are we left with if we got rid of all of them? Well, the potential benefit is that we would reduce anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions by 2.6% in the US and 0.36% globally. It's not nothing, but I'd suggest it's pretty damn close, especially when you have to then consider the potential cost, which is unbalancing our food ecosystem and creating essential dietary nutrient deficiencies. We could look at what would happen if you doubled beef consumption on average in the United States. We're talking 5 ounces a day. This is what we're talking about. That would double current beef consumption levels in the United States. Okay, that would be less than the tailpipe emissions from driving a car 2,700 miles a year, getting 25 miles per gallon, or taking one round-trip commercial flight, JFK to LAX via Denver. That's what we're talking. Oh, by the way, that this eating 5 ounces of beef a day, that's life cycle. That's everything it takes to produce the beef. Those transport, that's just tailpipe. That's just the fuel that's consumed. And again, the nature of the emissions is vastly different. One is a cycle, one is an enrichment. So there was a cool little study that was done. They looked at comparing a grass finishing system versus a feedlot finishing system, upper Midwest. They looked at 4 years worth of soil carbon data, and what they found was that under the grass finishing system, the emissions were higher than they were in the feedlot system. If you understand the science, that's not a surprise. But what they did say is that the sequestration that occurred under appropriate grazing management was more than enough to offset those emissions. Okay? Cool. Because if you dig into it just a little bit, what that means is probably all of the production cycle is negative, or at least zero. And then the other thing you have to know is that this was run on some depleted crop ground, so it probably wouldn't continue forever, right? But you get the idea? The numbers are not what we've been told. We could do the same thing with water use. I'm running late, I'm sorry. I promised to do better, and here I am again. One of the things that also is part of the conversation is we need to increase the food availability worldwide. And a big part of that's food waste. And the foods that they're advocating we need more of are the ones with the highest rate of waste from production through consumption. So not only would we have to eat more of them to get the nutrients that we need, we'd have to produce yet more of them to make up for the waste that would naturally occur. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about in the conversation is that the production of beef produces what's called ecosystem services. There are benefits to society beyond the beef itself. And of course, the ranchers don't get compensated for this, but they attempt to find a value for it. And when they deduct the carbon cost from that, they come up at a net 37 cents a pound. And that's before we've addressed the $1.72 trillion spent on obesity-related diseases. And any role that animal source foods, particularly beef, could have in lowering that cost. Remember I talked about greenhouse gas emissions? U.S. healthcare system is 10%. Now, I've been told that's not really a fair comparison because the people that did that study counted the food that was served, right? So there may be some double counting in there. But the point is that the pharmaceutical industry pollutes. And the pharmaceutical industry produces carbon dioxide releases, and that's not accounted for. What would happen if we could reduce the need for those? Oh, we can't have that conversation. So, quick review. Humans are heterotrophs. We have to eat other organisms. Animal products are superior sources of nutrition in the human diet. Ruminant animal agriculture offers unique ecological advantages over other forms of food production. It's not either or, but it is to say that ruminant animal agriculture has unique roles and will not be replaced by eating more commodities. There can be no sustainable agriculture without ruminants. Ruminants are not competing with humans for resources. Ruminant increase the quantity and quality of humanity's food supply. So they upcycle materials, they create more than they utilize as far from a human utilizable standpoint. Modern humans exist because of ruminants. Modern societies depend upon them, and they will be essential to meeting the needs of future, like 2050, when we've got 2 billion more people on the earth. Estimates of ruminant animal agriculture's environmental impact are typically overstated, oversimplified, and misleading. So from my thoroughly medically unqualified opinion, this doctor would tell you that a steak a day keeps the doctor away. I know that there's lots of other topics to talk about. I'm here until the end, so please find me. My very last slide will be some contact information. I just want to show you how the common narrative really needs to be questioned. I've stood in front of organizations promoting grass-fed, right? And I've said, you should stop making health claims for your products. So I just want to tell you that if you're buying grass-fed meat, so part of the message is anybody should go to the store in full confidence, buy the appropriate kinds of food that you can afford, that's available to you, that meets your background, and eat it with confidence that it's safe, it's healthful, it's nutritious. Okay? Don't feel like you have to spend more or not. Okay? When I first got into this space, there was the grass, the omega-6, omega-3 thing, and of course I'm a forage agronomist, so that tripped all my confirmation biases. Of course it's got to be. Okay, then I started reading. So here's some data. The smallest bars is yes for grass-fed. We can drop this hypothetical target of 4 to 1 across here. The grass-fed beef is lower, but the grain-fed beef isn't much higher. But look at the far right for a pork chop or chicken or even a soybean oil, that red bar in the middle. Well, I mean, that's got a better ratio than the pork or the poultry. Well, that can't be right, and it isn't. It's because we haven't looked at the content. It's really important to look at the content. It's also important to look at whether they're counting plant source or animal source omega-3s and omega-6s. Because the plant sources really aren't all that useful to us. Okay? But then we could add some other foods in here. So if you're spending extra, if you're telling people they must spend extra to get grass-fed beef because of the omega-6 to omega-3, please tell them not to eat walnuts. All right, because that's the one furthest on the right side there. That's the tallest one. And note that that line got broken because it wouldn't fit on the scale. So a friend says that virtually everything we think we know about nutrition comes to us through the filter of carbohydrate-based diets. And I'm seeing this in other disciplines that I'm trying to build bridges between. And so I urge us to kind of maybe reflect a little bit on some of the things we very confidently say, because we're very likely to come in contact with someone who doesn't know the vital message that you have about ketogenic nutrition and its therapeutic application, but they do very much know about the subject that you're talking about. And if what you're talking about is not factually based, you've just ruined your credibility. Right? You understand? Okay. So we've reached the 0 point. Of course, I had to stand underneath a sign that says Meat Cove and have my picture taken. You can find me. I have a blog. I'm on Facebook, all over social media. Please look for me. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for attending.